Okay, I wasn't supposed to be giving the introduction today. My partner Jason was supposed to give the introduction, but he had a small emergency, a child emergency, so I'm going to give the introduction. So I suddenly got very nervous. Yeah, welcome everybody. I'm Eloise Sweetman and I'm the co-director of Shimmer with Jason Hendrick-Hansma, who will come in later. And we'd like to welcome MARIANA FRANÇOZO and Merijn de Waal here today with us to be in conversation with Bik Van der Pol.
And everybody else.
Yes, of course. Thank you for coming. And we're here in the context of Bik Van der Pol's work today, which centres around questions of what is missing and specifically what is missing within the museum context. Here we think of apparitions, ghostly presences, and memories that might not be, a bit breathless, that might not have been realities, lost images, misregistered data entries. Bik Van der Pol's artworks act as conduits and connectors to other practices, politics and generations, moving the audience to revisit forgotten moments and memories from their works. For the exhibition that we're in today, the artists have made several different works and also have brought in old pieces from their, connected to their 1996 work, the bookshop piece, presented at the Boijmans van Beuningen in Rotterdam, the Netherlands. The work's investigations and studies conducted by our guests today prompt reflections on the concept of an assumed shared historical culture, neat, tidy and relegated to a category of knowledge in the museum. They also lead me, Jason, to think of our own individual memories of history and our perception of our authentic selves in connection to our past. Moreover, it brings attention to the methods we employ to embody these narratives within the museum setting. In a world where our uncomplicated sovereign selves are often seen as autonomous individuals detached from their own histories, and where there exists a seemingly agreed upon erfgoedcultuur canon in museums, our speakers today challenge and complicate these established notions. The discussions from today's speakers shed light on the complexities surrounding our heritage canon, disrupting the neatly agreed upon policies that govern it. So, thank you very much. I'll just quickly read the biographies of everyone, or is this already too long? No. Okay, good. Okay, so MARIANA FRANÇOZO is an anthropologist and a historian that works as Associate Professor of Museum Studies at the Faculty of Archaeology, Leiden University. Her research focuses on Indigenous Brazilian objects in European collections from the early cabinet of curiosities until present-day collaborative projects. She teaches and supervises students on topics in critical museology, museum and collection history, and collection-based research. Very cool. And Merijn de Waal has worked at NRC since 2006, covered the Euro crisis in Southern Europe as a correspondent in Madrid 2009 to 2014, and followed the presidential races of 2008 and 2022 as an editor. He also reported on a drug war in Latin America and travelled extensively along the US-Mexico border. Also very cool. So, and I will now, there's a little bit more here. Introductions are important, I think. Yeah. So Elizabeth and Jos, Elizabeth Bik and Jos van der Pol have been working together as Bik Van der Pol since 1995. So, which is also really cool to think that this work, a bookshop piece, was made in 1996. So it's a work from like the very beginning of their practice. So it's also really nice to think about it in that context. And they aim to articulate and understand how art can produce a public sphere and to create space for speculation and imagination. Their practice is site-specific and collaborative and includes publishing, writing and curatorial work. The artist's mode of working consists of setting up the conditions for encounter, where they develop a process of working that allows for continuous configurations of places, histories and publics. And it's really great to have you all here. Thanks for coming. Jason and I will be floating around all day if you need us, and the talk is being live streamed, as you may have noticed, and it will also be recorded, so there's a copy of that as well. Okay, so I'm going to pass the floor to Lisbeth and Jos, or Lisbeth, I don't know if you're both coming up here. You want to come on up here?
No, because we don't have any presentation
okay.
in sense with images, because we are there already.
So we will do.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just a very quick, short introduction, because this is not about us, but it's about you guys, and I want to have lots of time actually to also discuss and to have this kind of going around. But maybe a very short thing about, you said something about the bookshop piece already, one of our first works in 1996. We also and me worked together at that time with an English artist, Peter Fillingham, so we were a trio for 2 years, something like that, and then we split up and also we continued as Bik Van der Pol and no longer as Bik Fillingham Van der Pol. So it was really as a lawyer's firm, whoever is in the pot sort of has his name in it. That's how it's how we set it up together. When you invited us to do something at Shimmer, we had long discussions with you guys, with Jason and Louise, and it was really interesting to have these discussions and to talk through, okay, what can we do? Because you immediately sort of instigated that you would like to sort of think about our the start of our practice. Initially you came with the kitchen piece. I also have to say that all these pieces are in the Milieu Park, or you know, when we moved from one place to another, eventually when we moved the last place, we didn't touch it. It was also, well, we didn't touch it for a couple of years. It was re-exhibited after 98, actually the bookshop piece also went to London. And these works are in a way works that can be remade. No, it's like nothing big deal. It's not a handwriting. We have drawings, we can redo it, and we have lists of books. So maybe few words about the bookshop piece itself. It's a copy of the ICA bookshop in London. When we were working with Peter, we went a lot to London. He was London based, and we're totally excited by the ICA bookshop. And that was a time that in Rotterdam there was absolutely nothing like that, you know. And we felt it was really important to have something that people can sort of share language, share excitement, share discussions, etc., etc. So we thought, okay, let's bring that thing to Rotterdam. Then we built the model that you see behind you. That is still quite intact, I think. It's a little bit moldy, but it's still very okay, I think. And with that model, we went to the director and to the city curator of the Boijmans van Beuningen to say, hey, we're missing something really good here, like a bookshop, and can we do it? And they were both enthusiastic, and then we started actually building up a bookshop with the stock list of the ICA. And then you do it in a year, no? You sort of approach publishers, distributors. Initially we made photographs in the ICA bookshop. That was the time there was no digital photography, well, animated. We didn't have a digital camera. We did it with slides, so that was really like very crazy to photograph 5 bags or 5,000 bags of books, no? Then they said, what are you doing? They explained it, they liked it, we got the stock list, we got the drawings of the architect. We made a bookshop as a model, they went to the Boijmans, they said yes, okay, and then we started basically. So that was a whole year of building up. It was exhibited during the first Manifesta in Rotterdam. And then we had to take it down because we got all the books on a sale return base. And actually the distributors, mostly in the UK, were the most, well, the supporters, I would say, of the whole project.
Yeah, the books were for sale.
The books were for sale, very important. Also pre-Amazon, so people could buy the books for the English price usually, and then we put in slips, red slips, when they were sold, and we couldn't reorder because that took too long. But that gradually the bookshop changed, obviously, and then after the end of the bookshop, when it finished in, I don't know, September, October or something, we invited different libraries, public library, university libraries, etc., to come and to find the books that they might want for their libraries, because we also learned actually that libraries, public libraries and university libraries usually, at that time at least, I don't know how it is today, but they don't get a discount, they pay basically the full price that is usually paid in. So that's really, I think, terrible, because this is about knowledge, no? And I think knowledge should circulate, actually. So, maybe one thing about this thing that you see in the right corner near the black stripe. So this is a slide that Jos made with a 6x6 camera, and if you don't take out the sting, you get this.
Figures.
Yeah, so it's actually a mistake, I like the word also in that sense. So this thing that is here, this one, that was a print that a conservator of the print collection of the museum came to us and he said, this should be there, because it's really about what you're doing. And in our discussion and memory, hello, hi. So in our discussion and memories, let's say when we were discussing what we could do with Jason and Eloise, we couldn't reinstall the bookshop piece, also wasn't something that we desired. Also, you didn't desire that, thank God for that. Then we were sort of emphasizing again on this print, because this print seemed to be lost. Maybe 10 years ago, the conservators that came to, of the Mormons came to us and said, do you know where this print is? And we said, no, it's your collection, it should be in your collection, not in ours, no? And like I said,
what print is it?
The print, it's a print of one of the spaces in the museum. I think it's called the Bourdon ring. It's this older ring of Van der Steur, but I don't know. No, it's Van der Steur ring.
Drawing by the architect.
A drawing by the architect himself, and in our memory, in that drawing, there was a desk with a conservator behind the desk. So the conservator would be in the middle of his own exhibition, which is interesting, no? And I find it interesting to give information to the public, to talk, to hang out with the works, etc. A little bit like what Jason and Eloise do here, you know.
Implicated.
Yeah, and also what we did in the bookshop piece, because it was always there was always somebody to inform the public or whoever passed by about this work, and obviously also to keep administration of sold books, no? Those kind of things. Anyway, this print seemed to be missing, and then we said to Jason, at least it would be interesting to sort of use this invitation to recover the print, or to find ways of where located, find it, you know, if it's possible. So we started the conversation with the conservator of the print collection, the current one. We contacted the old one, who was a pensionada, who went actually to the State Museum. We contacted other people. Nobody could locate this thing. We got all sorts of photographs from the conservator. No, not that. It's not a photograph. It's not this, that, or the other. And then he eventually sent a digital image, which is like a lousy print of the print. We invited him today, but he's not here, unfortunately.
Yeah, but I think it's also interesting to tell, because the whole documentation went to the city archives. So we went to the city archive to look for, well, what they kept. And actually coming there, it was basically all the stuff we put in there. So bills, no images, nothing of the whole exhibition, just a press release, and that was it. So we thought, okay, why? And then also because we knew, because also on the website, you can't find anything of these projects anymore. So the whole memory, in a way, is gone, you know, for a certain period. So we thought, let's see, why, and then, so that was also one of the starting points to, and the museum is closed for at least 15 years, I think. So yeah, it's all about memory, and then I think like when Eddie grows up, he might go to the museum eventually.
So yeah, maybe so the missing object. What does that mean? And can we use this invitation somehow to sort of discover this and to actually start pulling some strings? at some point we got this message from the conservator that he might have found it, and we said, no, it's not true, because in our memory there was actually a person behind the desk. And now I don't know if this is the real print, or if this is maybe not a print, or if it's just in our imagination. We talk a lot, of course, no, that we just projected the person there, or I don't know. But I think probably it is this print that is now circulating. And we were also invited by Jason and Louise to set a public event. We had one drawing event a couple of weeks ago to think while drawing and speculating maybe what this print could be, or what something is that you notice, and based also on the text of Michael Tausig. I swear I saw this. And which I like for the title. And well, today we are here with Merijn and Mariana, and I'm very, very happy because we read this article in the NRC. Well, you will talk about this yourself, and we thought about, wow, what interesting. And then the whole trajectory of you as a research journalist going through all the fringes to find, let's say, the history behind one or two, in this case, I think, objects, and then finding all these people that you need to talk with in order to follow the track back. Mariana, because of the anthropology, I was Googling obviously. Yes, we have one in Leiden, not so far away. And also by the phone, on the phone we talked also about the big museum in Rio that caught fire, and that actually is also, it's a huge loss, of course, of all these objects that were lost in immense fire. I think almost everything got lost. And then it's also a chance for something else, so maybe you'll also talk about it. But I will give the floor to you, and I don't know who was going to start actually. We didn't agree on this. Whatever you want.
Maybe begin with Merijn.
Yeah. And it's like, it's not necessarily a lecture, so it's a conversation. Of course, it's nice if people can sort of finish their presentation. Ideally, it would be something that we share between us all, and lively, hopefully. Not obligatory.
No. Well, I'm a newspaper reporter, and my beat is the Americas, so both US and Latin America, and that's quite a intense job. I mean, we're writing about elections, earthquakes, everything, current affairs, so to say, but I'm already doing this almost 20 years now, so not to get bored, I always try to do one long-term research project a year. And that's most of the time it's research, it's making a reconstruction of an event, and but finding such a topic is always about being lucky most of the time. So you need, I think the English word is serendipity. You just have to stumble upon a story. So I was watching a documentary earlier last year. It was on the The Hague Film Festival about human rights, and it was a documentary about Ecuador, and it was about China's growing influence in Ecuador. But then there was a guy speaking, a guy from the Amazon, an indigenous leader, and he was talking about Shell, but not about Shell the company, but he was talking about it like it's being a place. So I was surprised by that, being Dutch and knowing Shell, but I also knew that Shell wasn't there. They have some gas stations in Ecuador, but they were never operating there, so I was surprised. So I looked it up on the map, and there was a place called Shell, and it was on every map because there's a big airport in Shell, and it seemed that this airport was an airstrip built in the 1930s by the Anglo-Dutch oil company. So I dug a bit deeper in this airport, in this place, and that's the greatest thing now about digitalization. You can read all the really old newspapers in the Netherlands. So this is a newspaper article, quite short, from Tubantia, which is one of the oldest newspapers in the Netherlands. They're from Twente, in the eastern part of Europe, of the Netherlands, just like Shell is in the eastern part of Ecuador. And it was quite a short article, but it mentioned that 2 spears were donated to a museum in Denekamp, Twente, by a Shell engineer. And the headline is saying something like, gifts with a what is it? Voorwerpen met een gruwelijke geschiedenis. So, objects with a horrific past. And those spares were used apparently because the engineer that donated it gave a little note with it. This is his note in his handwriting. And he mentioned an attack on the Shell camp in the Oriente region on the first Christmas Day morning of 1949, where 2 people were killed, 2 employees of the Shell company, local employees. And he took those spears back to Denekamp, where he was living in 51, 52. And he donated those 2 spears. So I contacted the museum. The museum is still it's not really alive and kicking, but it's still open. They are in quite financial distress, especially since the pandemic. And at first they couldn't find the spares. They were not in the collection anymore, at least not in the collection that's being exhibited. But in the end they found a bunch of spares in the basement, where the depot is. I went to Denekamp, and there was an 89-year-old volunteer doing the archive there, and he had quite a good archive, and he had documented all the spares earlier this century. But he had some problems finding those spares. But in the end we found those, and I took pictures and some video clips of those spares, and I decided to go to Ecuador to find the indigenous people that have, well, at least their ancestors that had been throwing those spears to the Shell company. So I wanted to know who were fighting with the Shell in the 40s, what was documented about this conflict, and if it would be possible to get the spares back to Ecuador. Because the museum in Denekamp, they told me, well, we haven't been exhibiting them for the last 20 years or something. We would be willing to give them back. Maybe the ambassador from Ecuador can come to Denekamp, so we get some press attention, and the museum is also benefiting. In the end, I went to one place, Tonyampale, and I found the guy on the left, Gomi. He was the last spare maker in the town. He was now making them as a souvenir for tourists. And he could confirm, watching those pictures and the video clip of the spares from Denekamp, that those were from his people, the Warani. And I also found the great-great-great-grandson of the warlord that was leading this fight against Shell back in the 40s. And he was also interested in getting those spares back to Ecuador, because he told me this history, although it's quite a recent history, is not in any way being taught to us in school. They get their curriculum from the capital, which is in the Sierra, in the mountains, and they are from the jungle in the Oriente, and they say our culture is not represented in this curriculum that we get. The only thing they do is translate it to our language, from Spanish to our language, but it's just the Sierra that's dominating our perspective on our own history. So I published the article in November, and I'm thinking about what could be next steps. I think it would be good to have the spares back to Ecuador, but it's not really easy. You can't send them with DHL to Ecuador. You always need the Ecuadorian government to get them into the country, to pass customs, but also I think it would be good to find a place where those spears maybe can have a role, maybe in the educational project, and then maybe they can be exhibited somewhere in the Oriente, so not in the museum in the Sierra, but really in the Oriente, especially in the area where the Waorani are still living. So that's not really easy. So that would be a long-term project, maybe. And one of the ways we could do it, maybe, is get the a delegation of the Waorani first to Denekamp to see where those spears have been collected after the 40s. Also because the museum is eager to get them back, but they are also quite afraid that if you just send them back, maybe they are going to be sold within a couple of days, because these spears that are now being made by Komi, he sells those spears for $50 each to tourists. But maybe spears with a history like this one can even sell for more dollars, and that's a fortune over there. So it's but I think if you give something back, you lose all control about it. So, but therefore I think they should. I mean, they maybe it's possible to embed them in some kind of project for the education, which is lacking a lot about this certain topic. So that's it. Yeah. And for the article, I spoke with Mariana, and she told me about a project she did. I think it was last year, about the delegation that came to Leiden. And that was really also an inspiration for further thoughts about these two spears for me.
What shall we do? The question now or after the two?
After maybe.
After, yeah. So
Okay.
yeah.
Can I just ask what kinds of decoration the spears have? So it's a...
Yeah, they were decorated also with feathers,
Yeah.
but those were
Those
lost
were
during
lost, yeah.
those decades in the depot.
Yeah, so the feathers were attached to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To the strings, yeah.
How many spears did they have in the museum again?
Two.
Two.
Yeah.
So there's one question.
Yeah.
With regards to, I think it's fascinating, where should they go if they are being returned?
Yeah.
Which is, probably they should be returned. And there's no organizational body in that sense that could receive them.
Well, there's the ministry in Ecuador.
Yeah.
I think there's also an agency concerned with that. So that would be, they would be get involved, at least to get them past customs into Ecuador. But then I would need a partner organization or something in the Oriente as well. And the Waorani are quite divided into different groups, also because of these oil companies that are playing this game of dividing them. So it's not like there's one Waorani leader you could go to. There's all kinds of groups. So that's. But I think the great-great-grandson, great-great-grandson, he's a really good guy. He's young, and he's also recently elected in a local body of the Waorani. So maybe he's a good person.
And you're saying the oil companies and Shell still have something like a presence there? Because initially you said in the beginning of your presentation that you were wondering Shell is not there.
There are a lot of oil companies,
yeah.
but Shell has was never able to find oil, at least not on a commercial level.
But there are other foreign companies
Oh,
investing
yeah.
in mining in it.
Oh yeah.
And here the last 15 years foreign investment in mining
Yeah.
is like 70%.
Oh yeah,
income in
mining,
Ecuador.
oil, timber. I mean, the Amazon is one big area for economic exploitation. But Shell was never there after they retreated in '49. the Guarani are still thinking that they defeated Shell, that they got Shell out of Ecuador.
Maybe they did.
Maybe they did for a part.
What does Shell say about that? Did you speak to them or not? Or
Well,
is there...
they reacted and they told me, no, we couldn't find oil, and I think also in 49, and they decided to leave Ecuador also because of geopolitical reasons. After the Second World War, it was easier for them to get back to the Middle East. So Ecuador, from a potential production country, became a reserve country for at least a couple of years. Then, after the crisis of Suez, it became interesting again to find oil in South America, and other companies used the airstrip also to have evangelicals getting into the Oriente, because they were thinking if we can, they were called savages, these Guarani, if we can have them find the Lord and Jesus, we can maybe get our oil company into the area without any more violence. But the violence continued for decades and decades. Especially the Guarani, they kept on resisting against any foreign, not even foreigners, also Ecuadorians, getting into their ancestral lands. They're quite fierce in defending their land. Yeah.
Maybe just add a fact that the Valhalla was one of the first Shell Petroleum
really?
here. So just to embed us, implicate us.
And just one small comment, as I was rereading your piece, you say at a certain point that the employee of Shell were not going into the forest alone, but they took local indigenous guides, such as the Jibaro. So sometimes when we talk about these situations, we talk very much about one side indigenous, other side Shell, and Shell didn't find, but it's much more complex than that. And maybe the Jibaro were, maybe not for sure, the Jibaro were also making choices in what they did and did not show to the Shell employees. So there are, well, your piece shows it, but there are many different local actors who all have an agenda, interests, political points to make or not to make. So it's, the story of Shell in the Amazon and other such companies, they are full, they really, in a way, prey on the local political dynamics, but they can be a victim of it as well. In the case of the spares, too. Very clearly.
Yeah, no, for me it's a very fascinating story, but for me the spread is almost like a fetish. What I find interesting is who has the right to own the forest and the resources. And I must mention, because Ecuador was a leading country pioneer in giving rights to the nature in 2008, when no one has even discussed this. In politics in the world, it's really the best country in the world, the first. But this is all over. In 15 years, neoliberal governments took the country over, and now it's kind of leader in giving foreign companies their resources and mining rights. So who owns the right to extract in Ecuador nowadays? I mean, that's, for me, this is the question. And why in 15 years has gone that way?
I mean,
it's a tragedy.
This constitution of 2008 was quite revolutionary, and it was based on these indigenous ideas of Pachamama and Buen Vivir, so Mother Earth and good life. But then there's the constitution, and there's the practical implementation of this constitution. And for example, the indigenous people, they got the rights of their ancestral lands, but only up until 30 centimeters. Everything that's lower than 30 centimeters is still victim to exploitation. So, I mean, there has been a referendum last year about drilling in the really biodiverse part of the Amazon in Ecuador, Yasuni Park, and 60% of all Ecuadorians voted, let's keep the oil in ground. but now the new president is saying, no, it's not possible to dismantle the oil installations there within a year. We need more time. So there can be constitutions, there can be referendums, but I think for the moment, money always wins.
But I have been, because I don't understand these things, I don't have a legal education, but I've been reading the mining law and the constitution, and they don't match.
No,
Just don't
but then you have to go to court, and it takes years and years, and sometimes the indigenous groups, they win a legal battle, but most of the times they also have to fight afterwards to get the legal victory implemented, because there's no rule of law. It's money. It's all about money. And, it's a pity. Yeah.
Maybe Marianne, you want to...
Yeah. Okay. Well,
but at least we know that the room is full of questions.
Yeah. No, that's. So. Well, good morning, afternoon, and thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be taking part in this conversation. And when Lisbeth called me and we sort of discussed the topic, right, the idea of loss in museums, we discussed a few concepts, but we sort of ended up on the Museu Nacional, the National Museum in Brazil, which is perhaps the closest example of total loss that we have in the museum world recently. So I'll just very quickly summarize what happened and how they are dealing with it now, and what it shows us, what it teaches us about loss in museums, of museums in this case. So there we go. The Museu Nacional is located in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. It was built in the 19th century, and it served as the residency, as the house of the Brazilian royal family. For those of you who don't know, we were a colony of Portugal until the early 19th century. Then we declared independence and immediately became our own empire, the Empire of Brazil. So that's why there's a royal family, which now doesn't mean much, hopefully, but they did own this palace. So in the early 19th century, 1818, the palace was there and became the National Museum of Brazil. And they had collections of indigenous material, but also natural history, sciences, astronomy. They had a library, which was located elsewhere, part of the library. It was a huge museum with a collection of 2 million items. And it's located in a park in the outskirts of Rio de Janeiro, a beautiful, huge park, and lots of families go there every weekend, a lot of children. It's a very lively place. It's an important place for the community. It's also located in a region of Rio de Janeiro that is not the richest, let's say. So it's really a place that is accessible to people of different incomes and different backgrounds. Then, as you all know, in the 2nd of September, the museum caught fire. What happened was that a lot of things, a lot of reasons, but the fire initiated, I think, on the first floor, in a room where they had 3 air conditioners running, but they were plugged into 2 power adapters, and you cannot do that. You need 1 per big machine. So one of those, the one that had 2 air conditioners plugged in, had a short circuit, like an electrical, and the fire started. The museum was indeed, there were many things about its structure and upkeep and just the infrastructure that needed attention. And obviously everyone knew that the directors had been asking for government funding to repair what needed to be repaired, but it took a complete fire, a complete loss of, I said 2, but it's 20 million items, I'm sorry. Almost complete loss of 20 million items for the government to actually give them any money to refurbish, to rebuild, etc. Personally, I had been there, I have friends who worked there, and at that night, I was in Brazil on vacation with my family, and I had a number of friends at home, all of them anthropologists, and we were having pizza because I was going to go back to the Netherlands. So it was a happy moment, and all of a sudden, everybody's phone starts going like beep, 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 beep. What's going on? And somebody says, "Turn on the television, turn on the television." We turned on the television and we saw the fire being live streamed, as we are being live streamed now, in front of us. And we get messages from friends, and people get very emotional. We heard that the researchers and many students and the population really around the museum went there to try and help, to save things. You have pictures of people trying to get in to save some stuff, which is obviously not what you do when there's a fire, right? You stay away. But the reaction, what I tried to say is that the reaction was so emotional, so strong. People had such an attachment to the museum that that happened. One of the reasons why the fire was so devastating is that when the fire brigade arrived, the, I don't know the name again in English, but the water things were empty. So they didn't have enough water so it was really devastating. So yeah, that was the night of the 2nd of September. So after a few days of, complete, not silence, but people feeling numb and trying to understand, was this on purpose, was it not on purpose, how could this have happened, and just trying to take stock of what was lost, very quickly a reaction began where people said, okay, we're going to rebuild. We're going to rebuild, and we're going to rebuild the collection, not only the building itself. So here you have some pictures, and all of these pictures, I put the credits, they're not mine, but the credits are somewhere down there. These are news items that you can all find online as well. So you see here on the left a picture, you can see how powerful, how strong the fire was, that even that iron beam sort of got twisted. But you can excavating the location and trying to save what was lost, or what was not lost, trying to find the remnants of things, and some items were found. I don't know if I put the photo here. Yes, if you see down there on the right, Denekamp meteorite was a very famous meteorite found in the late 18th century. Well, it did not melt, so so we still have that. It was found. The skeleton unfortunately did not survive, and many things didn't, but some did. So people were excavating, were finding things, and there was this enormous international, well, you remember, international commotion, right? Everybody felt, this is important, this cannot, everybody felt like they had to help. So again, quickly, donations of books I sent, like from Leiden, we got together and people donated books, and we sent to them. And even I remember some of my colleagues who work in ethnographic museums even said, well, maybe now it's time to talk about repatriation, because we have so many items from South America that we don't even show. I think when Merijn was talking about the museum in Denekamp, and or in your writing, you say there were a lot of spares, really a lot. And that's true for every ethnographic museum. Spares are one of the most common items, and most of them will be on storage because there's just no way to show everything. So people were talking about repatriations. It really, I think it was such there's this anthropologist called Vina Das, who wrote a book whose name I will forget, but I will remember. And she talks about critical events that are so powerful, so intense, that they sort of change the structures, social structures around it, or they make the structures around it move. I think it's called critical events or something. Anyway, I think that's how we should look at the fire at Museu Nacional. A very powerful moment where everybody was engaged in reacting to it. So what they did was, finally the government, even though it was Bolsonaro, the government did make funds available, and they're coming in also as we speak. So the building is being rebuilt. The facade will be the same as it was before, and the internal part will be a bit modernized, but will still follow much of what was there. Of course, state-of-the-art protection systems, etc. And when it comes to collections, and especially the ethnographic collections, once things are lost, well, you can't recover them. Feather work, they had a lot of beautiful feather work. They started making new collections with indigenous peoples, or in fact, I should say it the other way around. Indigenous peoples who had contacts with the museum, who knew that their culture was represented there and got fired, they themselves wanted to contribute, to collaborate, to make new materials, new feather work, ceramics, or even donate, I think it's this picture, yes, here in this image, all the way to the right, this wooden weapon was donated by Nísio Gomes to the museum. So it really showed this connection that the museum and the museum staff had been able to build with indigenous communities throughout decades and decades of its existence, to the point where new collections were being made. And they are being made as we speak. So it sort of gives the museum a chance. A journalist from the New York Times who asked me about this thing said, oh, so they are making a new museum that is decolonial. They are starting from zero. It's decolonial. I don't know. We can talk about that. I think it's difficult. But indeed, it's sort of the collections are coming in without the weight of, for instance, the story of shell that your spheres had. Also something to think about, right? What does it mean to have something so new that really represents new dialogues between the museum as this national institution and the indigenous people? And one of the nicest, this is very recent, things that are apparently going to happen, but that became news, is that some museums in Europe are willing to repatriate objects, and this particular one, which for me is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life, it's also the topic of my research, so I've been in love with this for more than 20 years, I talk too much, but this is a Tupinambá feather cloak made of feathers of the guará bird. Those are red feathers. They were very typical of Tupinambá societies. Tupinambá lived in the coastal area of Brazil. They were one of the first people to encounter the Europeans and to suffer the losses that is implied. But Europeans were extremely interested in that sort of material. It was also a very powerful object that was only worn by shamans, men and women alike. There's new research showing it. And you incorporate the powers or the potentials of a bird when you wear it. Well, not we cannot, but shamans do. So it was a very important piece of indigenous material culture. And there are only 11 of those still existing, all of them in European museums. And up until 7 years ago, there wouldn't be any conversation about repatriating. It's very fragile, it was absolutely a no-go. Last year and the year before, so the last 2 years, this very important and a very nice person, Glyceria Tupinambá, who is of Tupinambá origin, she's an artist and an activist and a student of anthropology at the Museu Nacional. She started doing more clear, well, she had been working with feather capes for a while, but she started traveling and talking about what the cape represents for her community today. And she went to Denmark and she talked to the museum there, and she was also so powerful so eloquent in showing the importance of this object to the museum that, together with the complete loss of the collections at Museu Nacional, got the director of the museum in Copenhagen to think, no, we have 2 of these capes. Actually, they have a bit more feather work, but capes they have 2. We can give it back to Brazil, and we can give it, differently from in your case, we can give it to the National Museum because that's a place where it will be kept.
They wanted to give the 2 of them,
No, only one. This one, which is in better shape. The other one is a bit more fragile and it's not on display. It's on the reserve. I don't know if they will put it on display afterwards. They also have a lot of feather, just like the bonnet, just the head part and other materials. They have a lot of ethnographic material from Brazil. For reasons that I will explain at some other point. But this is, to me, I wanted to end my intervention, let's say, with this piece because it connects the story of loss, fire in the Museu Nacional, with the story of loss of objects and cultures and languages of the indigenous peoples, but also with a very hopeful message, I suppose, which is we can, those losses, they can lead us to new collaborations, to new engagements, to positive interactions. It is possible to reconstruct, even if you're constructing something new. So to go back to the beginning, when Lisbeth and I were talking, and when I was reading also your paper, your piece on paper, and the idea of loss, I thought loss comes together with an idea of completeness. You only imagine you lose something if you think there's a total assemblage of things that you need to have. So maybe we can play with those two concepts and think maybe it's not loss, maybe it's a, well, the case of the Museu Nacional is a loss, but it's also just a movement, you know, something is going somewhere else and you still have the relationship between people and things that renders the loss. So now I understand why loss. So the print is lost, apparently. Maybe not, but look at how many things are emerging from that loss. So sort of a I don't know, optimistic, positive, Brazilian way of thinking of, from loss also comes transformation and new things. So I think that was it. Oh yeah, this is a film, I'll not show it, but if you go to the website of Museu Nacional, there are many little videos of them reconstructing and showing everything that is going on there. So it's a very positive thing you can look at.
When do they think they can reopen it?
They were planning for 2027.
Okay.
But this year in 2024, I think there will already be a small exhibition opening there. So they're pretty advanced. They're pretty, really working to make it happen. It will be a beautiful big party, and they have to do it now because we don't know what happens in the next election. So.
And the feather cape will be part of this first exhibition, or?
I don't think so. No, I think this might take a bit longer. What we know so far is that there was an announcement, it will be repatriated, and Glyceria, the activist and artist who is part of this discussion, she's also in contact with them. Glyceria, in fact, will be the representative of Brazil in this year's Venice Biennale. So if anyone has the chance, go see her because she's a very nice. What's her name again? Glyceria, Glyceria. Glyceria. But I think if you go to the site of the Venice Biennale, her name might be already there in the Brazil part. So, so things are moving, things are happening, such as your spears.
One question: there must be many objects that are not totally destroyed, but burned or damaged. Mm-hmm. They are not showing them? Or?
I'm sorry,
I have seen some shows, but like in Beirut or in Paris, where they present the collection burned. Like the items that have been on fire, basically you have something really damaged that is presenting the fire actually. Presenting the ruins basically.
I suppose they will. I don't know very well what they're planning. But I suppose that the fire itself will be an important part of the narrative of the new museum. I think so. I think it's almost unavoidable. Huh?
No, I say that because they're very emotional objects. Like I have seen, for example, this was very impressive, the apocalypse prints of Dürer after the Franco-Prussian fires in Paris. I don't know, you can cry if you see the violence in it. They are very special items. I find
absolutely.
The very negative approach.
Well, negative, it's also a reality. It's also
What I find always quite intriguing about discussions about repatriation of cultural material is that a lot of things seem to be taken for granted and that are kind of glossed over quite quickly. You know, that it is a good thing to do and that what is being given back, even the terminology of giving back, in my eyes, especially as an artist who is triggered by stories such as the one you wrote about how an object and its narrative can completely change through this very interesting angle that you put on it. Of course, these objects that are being given back are not being given back to be turned back into functional objects. They're being given back as cultural material, and you could also suggest in a way that they are Trojan horses, that they are implying that the receiver has to all of a sudden re-identify as precisely the problematic colonial museum in which these objects have such a life in order to be able to receive them.
Yeah.
And sometimes that is glossed over quite uncritically, because what can never happen is that these objects are turned back into functional objects. And it is also in a way out of scope, because it wouldn't be necessary if there was a culture that needed still these feathered costumes, they make them.
But they do. The Tupinambá do make them, and Glyceria makes new,
Yes.
and that's why she got to these ones. But I agree with you. There are way too many layers to these objects being returned.
Well, I mean, I do find it all interesting. That's also the reason. Just as Bik Van der Pol was triggered by this article, it was the same for me. I was, it fell on fertile ground. We were traveling to Chile. I had just finished the book by David Graeber about the dawn of everything, which was so interesting to me because it made me look at a history of which, admittedly, I didn't know that much about, but it even managed to turn that around. And the main conclusion of it was that there is history, there are narratives, but we must always, you know, keep on rereading things in order to be able to turn them around and go beyond our own preconceptions of what these things are. And what I really liked about your text was, you know, it made me, in a sense, melancholic, which is what good texts do, because they give you a hint of something and they make you feel like, oh my God, there is something, and it only touches upon something else that I should know so much more about. And not just in a personal, individual level, but it talks about, you know, it talks about a history that is hardly told. You know, it places what happened in Ecuador at the time in the context also of the Second World War just ending, and it is a strange kind of disbalance where books, whole libraries are filled with texts trying to contextualize and make us understand what happened geopolitically during the Second World War. And something, because of perhaps this imbalance of power, was not talked about so extensively, but which may have had much more consequences, or you could argue for saying that geopolitically it was just as important what happened in that area. You mentioned it before with the fight over exploitation rights, the introduction, the confrontation between cultures that hardly had any contact before, and it was nice that these spears presented you with, as you called it, a serendipitous moment. Of course, as an artist, I have a professional interest in seeing, can this serendipitous moment, can the materiality of the objects, and I guess this is also what we're here to discuss today in relation to your object, can we scratch that surface? And maybe that's what makes me a little bit melancholic in a good way about it, because the text suggests yes and no at the same time. You know, it contradicts itself in a good way, because it says, yes, these spears could be the holder of one history and then other histories that deny it, and at the same time you demonstrate quite effectively that they don't, because what holds it all together is a serendipitous moment where the text takes over, and the writer who went and researched something that the spears for all this time until now were never actually telling, because they were in this dusty museum fulfilling a cliche story, an anecdote basically, which was so much more than that.
Yeah.
Right?
But I suppose one of the points, well, there's a million points, but one of the points is, and I think you mentioned it, is always, do the indigenous people, community of origin, whoever, people in Indonesia, doesn't matter. Does the group in question want it back? It doesn't have to be a Trojan horse if you respect what these people are saying. If people say, no, we don't want it, end of story. Or they might want it in many cases, but indeed to help them, in the case of the Tupinambá, that's absolutely the case, to help them recover in a good way, reconnect to their identities, which had been forcibly denied. They couldn't in Brazil and other places for many, many centuries. If you were indigenous, you were a lesser person. You could be imprisoned, you could be killed, you were exploited, you were seen as a lesser human being. So many communities, sort of put away those identities because for their own safety. And now, when we hope there's more space for cultural diversity, and there's actually a constitution that that is more or less respected, people want to recover that lost or that hidden identity. So it's a good Trojan horse. The question is, do they want it? And if they want to make something else out of it, they make something else out of it. The other thing that triggers me, maybe I should sit there, otherwise I'm too sad. The other thing that triggers me in these conversations is we have an idea that the museums are permanent, and that collections in museums are permanent. They are not historically, they move, they circulate, things are lost, things are stolen, things are exchanged, displaced, a lot of displaced things, mislabeled, oh, is this one, is that one? And they don't have to be stable. That's my point, that's my vision. Other people see it differently.
Also, I think there's also a question about the museum itself. I know about Indonesia, there's also a lot of talking about the repatriation of objects. There are many objects, for example, in the Rijksmuseum and many other museums here, Tropen Museum or World Museum. They want them back. Maybe not all of them, but they want them back. No? And then there's the issue in the negotiations, as I have picked up in these discussions, whether there's a proper place to send them back to. Are they well protected? Are they as well protected as they are here? No, somehow, or well protected, I should say. Museal conditions that are actually a construction that is, let's say, has been developed in the West as towards the point where we are now. Air conditioning then blows the building up. So maybe they shouldn't have done that. But then there is talking in Indonesia that they built a museum, and then the museum should be paid by the Dutch for obvious reasons. And all the time there's this kind of model, the model of modernity, I would say, that is housing as a container all these precious objects. While you said it cannot just go back to some kind of, because then maybe it will end up in the tourist trap, or it will be capitalized for a lot of money, or it will end up in, I think it's almost inevitable. The whole circulation is already, let's say, like this, and then the museum becomes the storage that fixes it, but also with regard, in the same way, or with the same language, or with the same routine, I would say, that has been developed. So I'm sort of thinking okay, if it's okay that the museum collection moves, and I think it would be very okay. That's also why I think the bookshop piece should have been in the collection of the Boymans moving but that was the problem. So they cannot contain a piece that's moving in itself, because books are that's another category, But I think somehow what could museums of the 21st or 22nd century maybe, in our future when we are very positive, everything is on the move, in a good way, what could museums be then, in that form, or that shape that is maybe not how we see it today, with tickets and turnstiles and guards, and I don't know, of course,
Can I maybe add something as well? Because in your case, you traced back the great-great-great-great-grandson. And that is a private, that is an individual, that is like you can trace it back generations, like his, and so in that sense there is, like, you could say, like, oh, but that person cannot sell it because we don't want it to be, we don't want to lose the object into commercial, whatever, tourist trap, but that's like something that we, like how private can an object be? Like I was like trying to empathize if I have family from the Netherlands, India, Indonesia, so trying to, even though I don't know, I cannot really have all the knowledge from generations before me, maybe I don't understand the objects. What if those objects are presented to me because my ancestor, they were from my ancestors? Can I have a personal imagination around it? Is that allowed, or is it given to me, like I will give it back to you, but you cannot do this and this? Is that actually really repatriate, or does it come with all these restrictions that are put on top of me? So I find that, like, when you can actually trace it back to a person, I find that a different story than when you cannot trace it back and you kind of give it back to a people, maybe, or you give it becomes a...
And maybe it's maybe also interesting to think about objects and instead of in ownership in terms of custodians, provisional custodians, because in the end, the reason why the states are so interesting is because it contains in this anecdote a European history, and specifically the history of shell. And if you bring it back to a place where there are 1,000 other spades, this history is lost somehow. So how do you keep together? How do you carry together with these objects part of this European history when you bring it back wherever it has to be?
No, and also, I mean, these spares were part of an attack where in total 19 spares were being used. So they were using many more spares than needed to kill somebody. And
show the stairs back home.
Yeah. So the thing was also that by the Waorani believed that the spares maybe lost their use after throwing them. They were just murder weapons after that. So I spoke with, they murdered also a Catholic bishop in the 80s, and I spoke with the monk from the Capuchinos order, who had to go to the Oriente to retrieve the body of the bishop and the sister that was accompanying him. And he told me that the Waorani believed that you have to spare your enemy and to keep his soul, his spirit in the corpse. But as soon as somebody pulls the spares out of these corpses, the spirit goes over to that person. So you have to kill that person too. So he had to hide for a couple of months. And there were other stories that also supported this version of the Waorani thinking about the spares of not only murder weapons, but also a way to have your enemy silenced for the rest of the time. So it's hard maybe to, I mean, this is not these spares are only 75 years old, and they haven't been stolen. I mean, they've been thrown, and one of the people close to the victims has decided to take them back to Europe to tell this story, but
I think it's fair enough, because I was in my mind already trying to make a comparison with if they would have used Kalashnikovs instead of a spear, would you want to restitute the Kalashnikov?
Yeah, or the bullets.
And then the bullet was, in my mind, a better metaphor, because the bullet, you can rightfully say from a certain idea that the bullet belongs to the victim. And in Holland we have actually a tradition of exhibiting the bullet, not the ones that killed Willem van Oranje or whatever, one of those. So. But it's interesting that these spears, in the way that they in the state they were right before you encountered them, they were on this kind of tipping point between representing this very interesting new look at history, or as something which fit within a kind of a cliche pattern, thinking of ceremonial items that give us a bit of a insight into how these peoples on the other side of the world may have lived. You know, this typical archaeological tendency to, and the second story is arguably much more interesting. And in a sense, your article hints, you know, you were mentioning about future museums. Maybe the question is like, what do we want in our museums? You know, how do we fill our new museums? Maybe we're filling them with the wrong things, and then sometimes burning off. Just probably a little bit of it's good to make place for new items, and it's funny to look at how do things transform. You know, transform from functional objects into cultural material. And there's another very striking example in your article, even in the photos, but one that you actually really nicely contextualize as well. That is the Western spear in a way, and it's the airplane that's hanging on top of the entrance. It's material culture turned into something, and not only that, because of the context, I believe you mentioned that this war that they waged was done with I don't know what word you use, it's been a few months since I read your articles, so they're like the leftovers from something else, right? The airplanes were not...
Yeah, after the Second World War, there were more airplanes available, also more pilots.
Right.
So a lot of these pilots, they had been fighting in the Second World War, especially in the Far East. And they needed their adrenaline kick in peacetime, so they assigned to fly for such a company like Shell with the same airplanes they were flying in the Second World War. So it was possible to reconstruct one incident where they threw dynamite on one of the villages of the Warani in an apparent vengeance attack, because the Warani were attacking their base camps all the time. So I spoke with the son of one of these pilots involved in this attack, and he was already 80 years old, living in Texas. And he confirmed to me, because already in the 50s and 60s you could find articles in the Ecuadorian press mentioning these bombardments, as they were called. So apparently it had been done even more time, but Shell didn't confirm anything about it, of course. But the same son, he also told me that when they left Ecuador, they also brought one of these shrunken heads, because the Jivaros, the group that was working together with Shell to guide them in the jungle and also to fight the Warani, they have this tradition of shrunken heads. So they had, sorry. And so they, if they kill their enemy, they chop off the head and they cook it and they make it smaller. And they use it, I think, as an amulet. And he told me he had taken one of these heads in his teddy bear, called Osito. And he took it to the States, and it's now being displayed in the museum in Houston, the National Museum. And these artifacts of human remains, I think those are the first that should be brought back, because those are human remains. And there's a project for that.
It Rivers Museum in Oxford, together with Maria Patricia and some colleagues in Ecuador, and some today they're called Shuar, but Ibero communities are working on first identifying, finding out the shrunken heads, census in European and US museums, but especially European, and bringing them back, because there are two important things about these shrunken heads, and again, the story is bigger and more complex. First, there was this, they became fashionable. It was a nice thing to collect a shrunken head in Europe from the 20s already. It's very early, or even earlier.
To carry it as a necklace?
No, to have it at home. To have it at home, I think, I hope. So even now, 10 years ago, I was in Denmark at this museum in Aarhus, and one of the people there said, "Oh my God, you're from Brazil, we're on Amazon. Huh? Look, we just got in the mail this," opened a little box, shrunken head, because in the attics of some people from the period, people were buying it. So it became a market, and what happens when you become when something becomes marketable? More production.
Yeah.
How? With fakes, with goats. So a lot of the shrunken heads are not human at all, and you can sort of see it. So there's also the issue of. So I just think, you know, when we talk about indigenous peoples, they're so much more connected to Western society, and Western society has so much more to do with the way they interact. It's not the wilds doing something wild, then the West returning something or not returning. It's, as your piece shows, it's this super complex history of interactions that connect, you know, World War II to the Jíbaro, to the. So, in the end, I don't think there's a recipe. There's no way. It's really case by case and talking to the people involved, because, those things. And one of the reasons why the Shuar wants to do this project is because they do not want to be portrayed in museums as people who kill the enemy and carry around the Shuar. They don't do it anymore. They don't want to be seen as that. So
No, but they're still nowadays in the American press, they're still called headhunters. It's really,
I
really
know.
all full of cliches.
There's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of work to do, but that's why it's sort of unearthing those very complex histories with many details. It allows us to, you know, to think, think a bit more, also more generously about what might be a solution for the future of the museum.
So, I mean, just to maybe circle it back to something that we can put on the plates of the two artists that started this whole thing, this whole mess. I mean, on a kind of a tangent, we've been working a lot with archaeologists in the past 10 years, and it was coming from an area of not knowing so much about archaeology. It was great because we met, in a way, our brothers and sisters from another mother, because they have a completely different kind of academic background, different rules, but they are interested in the same things, and we're also interested in anthropologists, right? But the archaeologists have one little mark ahead from our personal point of view, is in a sense because they meddle as well in that murky area of turning the material into narrative. You know, whereas an anthropologist is already much more in the narrative. There is there's a bigger alienation, perhaps. You could argue with it.
No, but
And maybe you don't need the object.
I'm sorry?
To make anthropology, maybe you don't need an object per se.
No, but then you could argue that the peoples are in a way also objects, right? Is that, am I putting?
No, you're absolutely right, and I agree with you. I also have a fascination for archaeology. I married an archaeologist. Go ahead.
So and actually they're really great storytellers, because they can take a handful of dirt and then sometimes confabulate the most extensive theories on the basis of that. So super interesting. But apparently, and this was our biggest surprise, they have an equally problematic relationship to the museum as we artists, contemporary artists do. We problematize it, we complain, we cry a lot, and yet we pay homage to it, and we'd love to all be exhibited in the biggest museums of the world as well. It's a love-hate relationship, and so do the archaeologists. They will hang on to their artifacts for as long as they need to write their PhDs and their articles, and once that is done, it goes to the museum, and the archaeologist is like a bad lover, turns around and loses complete interest in the artifact. They also lose interest in what happens in the museum, because they have their text that then will be taken up in the big library of the world, and that's that. It's turned into knowledge. And now I'm going to go back to this bookstore piece of you guys, because in a way, I suppose a very important theme of the project was knowledge. How the access to knowledge, distribution of knowledge. It's also very much coming from the legacy of contemporary art, you know, is a stock list of the books of equal value as the books itself, what remains. You know, in a way, you have to read all the books and you have the knowledge. Do you still need the books? You know, this was all part of the project. It was an ephemeral project in that sense. And now we're left with a very meager material remains, and we're doing a new kind of archaeology. But apart from the mention of the stock list, we're talking now about the museum, you know, having maybe not played, not taken their responsibility, only kept the bills, kept the most minimum archaeological evidence, basically, of this thing happening, this event. And I'm wondering now that we've been looking at the world through the eyes of these two guests, if we can rethink that, you know, what happened here.
I also wanted to just say something, sorry to interrupt you.
No,
I wanted to say something a while ago related to that, because you said very clearly, of course, the government couldn't keep this. And I guess we all agree here, this was a big mistake. My life as a Rotterdam artist would have been different if the Boymans would have been a good museum and would have kept this project, or at least bring it back from time to time. And this could have happened easily. I mean, we all know very few years after, I remember the first time I heard something like that. Do you remember this Superflex channel? Superflex
radio channel.
In Liverpool, they had this television in this building, and then it worked so well. They keep it for many years.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow. I mean, the Boymans could have done that with their library, and where would we be? And I also wanted to mention that because I'm a bit frustrated living in a city with such a museum, but also and the lack of, actually, it's a reflection, the lack of, and also mentioning, thinking about what you said, the interesting is the activity, what happened with, what you can do with, what the governments could have done with, or what happened with these books that actually were sold, how they affected people.
Yeah. I think there's many layers to this question. On the one hand, within the context of what a museum is, with this conservation policy, you receive an object. I was always amazed by, what's his face? Matthew Barney. No? Yeah. The museum bought his work. His work is very performance-based, it's objects and etc. And they need to be animated, inhabited, performed, no, in order to make a work again. No? So the Boymans has Cremaster, whatever, number 4, I think, no, in their possession. And he came to the Boymans during the directorship of Chris Durkholm, and they reanimated or reperformed, whatever use of the words, no, one of this specific Cremaster version, no, and some models and people and this and that, no, and there were also objects, let's say, that sort of had a holy presence somehow, made of wax or paraffin, I don't know, and he was very excited to see the piece again before the performance even was put on, no, he couldn't touch it. No, he wasn't allowed to touch it, to put it on, to do this, that, and the other, because as soon as a museum collects something, buys something, acquires something, it's supposed to be fixed. No, nothing should be intruded, not even fingerprints, pH, value, I don't know, everything. No, so with I always had to think about this. No, and our piece had a bookshop piece. I say obviously because in the context of that kind of discourse, of course this work couldn't be collected by the museum. We had discussions with them, no? Our desire, would have been, great if the museum would buy it. I'm not so interested in having pieces in the collection, but if they have that piece in the collection, it should be mobile. It should be maintained, and not maintained in dusting the books that are there until eternity, but actually keep it alive. No? So every time maybe you pull it out of the attic or cellar or whatever it is, no, they should revitalize the collection. No, they should redo it. No, it's okay. We know it's work of a year, no, to do that. Of course, again I say of course, in the context of how museums function and work, they don't do that. So it's impossible to have such a work if the condition is that you want it to be alive all the time, no, It cannot be done. And if they wouldn't have, if they would have been interested nevertheless to buy it or to acquire it and to keep it as something, put a glass box or a vitrine and nothing can change, then it's not interesting to us.
Yeah.
I don't know what this piece does then. It becomes like an antiquity throughout the years.
They don't necessarily need to buy it. They could have.
Of course, yeah, there would be
Because
all sorts
visuals
of
as well.
but that's maybe also and that's also what I find interesting, to look at something in retrospect. It's also, I would say, for me at least as an artist, doing this work in this museum changed my relationship with what making work and making art and what it is a museum and so on and so forth. It changed that, no? Today, with this changing information, I could find all sorts of solutions that they could have done, and maybe today the museum itself could also have made all sorts of ways had thought of all sorts of ways to do that, but then that didn't happen. No? So yeah, it's increasing insight.
And then it's also good to tell that we actually stamped the books, so to trace the books that were sold. The stamps over there. Actually, you bought this piece in the bookshop piece, and some even in the, I think, public library. Sometimes you can come across still.
So can you like write a history of who has had the books, potentially read it, or where they have moved and circulated?
Well, dissemination is also a work. You may not be able to grab it.
That's nice. But just, to make again a parallel with indigenous peoples, not all of them, but in many cases, when they visit museums in the Netherlands or wherever, they talk, just like you talked about your work, it has to be kept alive. It's fine that it's here, but I don't want to see it in the corner of it has to be awakened. There's even some kind of, now it's called Museum Leiden, but they did a project with the Kalina and Lokono from Suriname, and they wanted, I think their Olok, also a feather headdress, to be given water. It needs to drink, so they put a bottle of water in the display, in the showcase, which is a really big thing for a museum to do, because the water, oh my God, it can damage. Yeah. But they did it. That was a very brave thing. So it's exactly the same concern. I'm not saying or doing something to be forgotten. It needs to be talked to. It needs to be sang to. It has to be alive. So I agree with you that maybe in this day and age there would be solutions to keep the object.
It was a bit. Now it's obvious, it was a bit pioneer, but a bit early for that time. At the same time, it was the 90s, it was the moment of relational aesthetics, so people were doing that, clever people were doing that. The museum could have catch up, they had the knowledge. But this was on the air, no? Theoretically, they could have catch up.
But couldn't you argue, in a way, that the reason that its success lies in the fact that it doesn't exist anymore in any kind of form? Because of course your action is, you could say it's a little bit provocative, you're also already part of this transformation process of taking something that is useful and turning it into an artifact. But in a time, as Lara rightly points out, in which this is part of the discourse and so the public is ready to engage with it, but it then had to dissipate and it did be disseminated, and the fact that there is nothing left of it means it was a success, because the museum couldn't catch it and turn it into this glass, ivory, ebony, whatever thing that is being put into spaces, right?
But in a way, yeah, exactly. That's like if we just collect objects or works, it's also a fetish. But if this idea of the absence, that you were talking so much about, like how powerful it can be to be able to go back to the idea, to that same idea over and over again, and make it meaningful. Because that's what we are speaking about. How can we make meaningful things out of objects?
And out of the loss or the absence thereof.
Yes. And sometimes this meaningfulness comes from an absence. It has to come from an absence.
Maybe that's also why we didn't start a bookshop.
Yeah.
That was also a question that was asked to us a lot of time. no, why didn't you just start a bookshop in the city? No, then
They ask these kind of questions. They were horrible questions.
No, but I think that any question is fine for me. No, but I think in a way it's also a lot about this missing, about the lack. No, if you perform something, it's also, I find it really good that it doesn't exist anymore after that. That's also live, no?
Yeah.
But it doesn't exist anymore after that in order to feel actually what it is that you're missing. Because if you have a bookshop in the city, everybody takes it for granted, and they go or they don't go, no? It's like this, no? But I think through the missing, maybe that activates another emotion somehow, or it generates maybe some emotion in citizens in this city that maybe think, oh, I'm
gonna do it.
We need this actually. No, and it's like if it's there, then it's like normal.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, it's the museum burning down. All of a sudden, the
you
government says, oh no, we have to, this is important.
Yeah.
We should have paid them, we should have supported them for a long time, but we will now. So it's.
But not only I was struck by your story. Not only the government was sort of suddenly seeing the light or something, but also the people. And it wasn't. Yeah, I know it was a much visited museum by how national museums are in a way. Everybody goes there maybe once in their life or more or something. But I was struck by what you told about it, that actually people started coming to the museum with suggestions of how it should be, what could be in there. I have this, I have that, I can give you, and of course there's many things with that, organizational-wise, emotional, etc. But I think it's really interesting that it was already owned by so many people without maybe it being. It knowing that, somehow.
I think so. Yeah, I think it made that clear. It made clear how important the museum was for very many different groups of people and individuals. I think it really, and it all happened sort of like organically during and after the fire, people, mobilizing.
And is everybody convinced that it should be in Rio de Janeiro and not closer to their own ancestral lands? Or?
No. But at least I can't talk for everyone, but what I've been reading and hearing so far is that people precisely want things in the National Museum in Rio de Janeiro, first because it has this important story. It was the residence of the royal family, it became the National Museum, it's known, it's a landmark. And when you have something of your culture in a place of that importance, it gives you visibility. It means you exist.
So they see it as recognition for them.
It's recognition. Yeah. When the Kapor came to Leiden the first time in 2013, the Kapor are from the Amazon, the eastern, speaking of eastern Amazon, and we asked them, so we have, I think, 250, 260 objects made by your ancestors, the 1960s, not so old. Do you want it back, or can it? No. We want it to stay here. We want us, the Kapor, to be represented along with all of those all of the nations of the world. We just want the name of the artist who made each piece on the label, because of course we know if you go to a Western art museum, it's the name of the artist. If you go to an ethnology museum, it's Kapor, Guarani, Wari, as if there's no individual. But that's the thing. I think not for everyone, but for many people, indigenous or non-indigenous, it's important to be represented, to exist.
A question about that, because I was also thinking for entrepreneurs, I think sometimes for artists it's different. Like there are certain projects that are better in the alternative. That's the alternative, or yourself, your friend, or the art center. And the museum is the So I'm thinking, for example, a project like yours, if you have by chance donate with an alternative art center or former maybe you would have had more possibilities to, because they are more open to experiment. I think in contemporary art, sometimes, instead of the big national museum, we need like also one of my first projects, I also was working with the Rijksmuseum, the same as you, Antonio, and this was just too much for the Rijksmuseum. Like you cannot go to the big National Museum for certain things. You better stay smaller. So yeah, but then of course you have the institutional critique. To do such a project in the important museum, the Boymans, it's also meaningful. So what do you think about it? Why you went to the Boymans instead of the Apple or the?
I'm very clear. No, the Boymans is like people here. You guys don't know because it's closed, which is also a pity. But I think the Boymans, what I think is extremely strong of that museum is the different collections that they have. No, classical, pottery, prints, modern art, contemporary art, and then all the other things in between. So I think six, seven main directions in their collections that were guided by as many curators or conservators in museum language, also in the word, no, that didn't talk with each other. That each of everyone, they were having their own island. I'm the pottery island, I'm the print island, I'm the this, that. No, they didn't talk with each other. And all these different objects, collections, stories that were being told or wanted to be told also had to intertwine, no? Because a pot and a print and a painting may be more related than everybody thinks, but if everything sort of stays on these islands, they don't communicate somehow, no? The objects, but obviously also not the people. So for us it was really a totally logical step not to put it in a contemporary art place like Bik van der Pol at that time. Because then it would be in that bubble somehow. No, we wanted it to be in the National Museum in Rio, for example, no, or whatever. No, in those we also discussed with Cape Town. We went to South Africa. They wanted to have it, but it became impossible. But I really like it when it's actually in a context where it can sort of become a glue or a cement between the different people, the different collections, etc. So that somebody who is from the print collection actually finds something really interesting in the architectural department and then talks with his colleague. In a way also sharing the same excitement that we had, you know, that's maybe our personal input. When we were in the ICA, always books seemed to find us instead we searching for something to, if they had that. No? So it's like this kind of excitement and suddenly there's these kind of crossovers, this mingling, etc. So yeah, Boymans was in this city at least, and we sort of we were going to the Rijks. We thought like, okay, there's the gap, there's something that's lacking. We have to put that in. And if they would have said no, then probably it wouldn't have been there. But because of Chris Durkon coming from Witte de Wit and Arno Verhoosma, the city curator, they both said yes, no, so they recognized it.
Yeah, but I think also the ICA originally, you know, it's an Institute of Contemporary Art. It's also film, theatre, and visual arts. And then this bookshop very central in the entrance. So when you go to the exhibitions or theatre plays, and that's why we also thought, okay, in the Boymans, because there was this shitty bookshop downstairs, we were just selling
coffee table
books and never changed. And then also, you know, we said that that's also part of the whole negotiation with the museum, that we would sell the books and the profit would go to us, not to the museum. So it's also an economic deal. And of course the bookshop owner was not amused at all, because he thought, okay, they go there. But also the funny thing is that a lot of people didn't see it as an artwork, they just saw it as a bookshop. You know, you come, because you see it from the back, it's like a box. But then when you turn around, suddenly all these colorful books, and you know, we were displaying these books also differently all the time. And then he just went in, you know, and I said, oh yeah, and then buy this book, and then you ask for the stamp, and then you explain, and then it's look, and of course this was there also. So yeah, and then also later on, then people we knew who went to the Manifesto because it was well visited. It was the first time. When you come across those people worldwide, it's, oh, where are you from? From Rotterdam. Oh yeah, but this nice bookshop.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So like, actually there's two questions. So if you would move the bookshop to another like country, other museum, would you move it with the sold books, like the red slips, or like a new?
No, we did it also in New York.
And then it's completely
another, yeah, it's a totally new offset. So you have to restart the whole industry.
So how,
2 years later.
and how meaningful were the buys? Like whenever you made a sell, specific books, because there was only one copy of every book,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
that informs something, I would say.
Yeah.
Like how was that? Because you made a decision to sell it. How meaningful were those sales? Or like, what did they tell you?
That's too
Well,
much, no?
yeah.
That's too much, no? Maybe to go back to the issue of New York, where we exhibited the work again. Before we did that, because New York is not a city that has a lack of bookshops, actually, you know? So when we were invited to do this in a gallery, we thought we cannot just like put the whole thing just like boom, no? So we spent a lot of time making a round, let's say, along all these different bookshops in New York, what they had, what they carried, also the vintage bookshops, etc. What is happening there, what is important and interesting. And then we restarted from the same stock list, but discussed with the different and distributors what should be now, what should be added, how should we do it differently, what should be. Now this is all, of course, a huge question if you have 5,000 books in this thing, no? So that's also why I cannot answer your question like, oh, this one book, what did it mean, no? Or what did it say? There is books that I have in my memory that were there. There's also some books that we have at our place, and that started the start of our library, basically. You know, you can become a little bit frantic about books. But yeah, I don't know. I like it when people come, also in the context of this exhibition here at Shimmer, an image was being sent by one of a Rotterdam-based artist who had bought a book at that time with a stamp, and she sent the image of that, no? So it's like, yeah, I don't know. I cannot answer it.
I think the reason why I also ask, because it's connected to the missing object, and I really love that about the work, that it's there. It's allowed to move in a way, like they can. Yeah, but then like what's left is like a red slip, and that you can see it as like a missing object. I don't know. So I find that very beautiful. You know, yeah, it's a living thing.
Creating a need for people, potential need that they want to have a bookshop.
Exactly.
And to create, and then the moment you take it away, you think,
They make a meeting out and use the bookshop in Rotterdam.
Which we're still missing.
In a way.
There's now more, you know, I think after that V2 had a bookshop for a while, quite shortly after that, so they started in their building a bookshop for a couple of years, I don't remember how long. Roodkapje had a bookshop, Worm had a bookshop, so it was sort of maybe picked up and given on somehow, the spirit, or I don't know. I would say that the New Institute bookshop is also pretty good in its specific approach, no? So there is now more going on that I think, well, at least more than that.
Yeah, but there was also an interesting remark after the exhibition in Dubai in 1996, because the director of the Kunsthal wanted to have the structure but not the content, because he was lacking space, so he thought, oh, that's an interesting architecture. So he said, okay, can we buy the structure but not the content?
We always said like, well, this is like buying the Richard Serra because you need something that sort of divides your garden from the next door or something.
But would he have
As a structure, as a book, because he was lacking space to console when you enter, he had this place, and he thought, okay, this is an interesting. And he would put in the same books as the Bormans that probably would have.
I mean, okay, it's all wrong, especially in the 90s. Oh my God, great that you didn't do it. But, we're talking about relational aesthetics and the moment we were in at that time, and now we're 30 years later. Where are we now? We talked about new museums and all that. And you mentioned, of course, how museums are more and more aware of the role they can play with a diverse, multicultural kind of public, and their claims to being represented by that museum. I mean, it's a discussion that I follow, and I have maybe a little bit more kind of double feelings about. The museum as a stage for self-identification, I think, hinges on some misunderstandings of what a museum actually is, but that's a whole other discussion that one day maybe we will have. But as an artist also, I encounter a lot of performative stuff in museums, precisely answering to the need to revive the museum, to not make it anymore that stuffy mausoleum of dead pieces, which it's true, before the 90s we were taught to look at the things that were presented to us in a museum as this is the way you're supposed to look at it, and there is no other way to look at it. And thankfully we're getting beyond that now. But because we're getting beyond it now, and because of the contact with the archaeologists, I'm slowly also coming to terms with maybe the original ideological reason why we fill the museums with dead, stuffy things. Because within the scientific method, ideologically speaking, because practically it doesn't really work that way yet, but the reason why an archaeologist says, yes, after I did my study, you can have the things that I dug up from the ground, it's not because I am right and I want to demonstrate that I am right forevermore, but I might be wrong. And in 10 years, a young, smarter archaeologist will come and say, look, I'm going to look at the thing that you dug up and you drew the wrong conclusions. My name is Merijn de Waal. These spears are no ceremonic evidences of a long-forgotten culture. No, they're evidence of a big geopolitical crime that took place beyond our perspective at that time. And that's what's interesting, that we can reconfigure these items. It's a trap as well, because we're having a lot of that, and there's something to. You could also criticize the idea that you have a bunch of stuff that used to be evidence of the glorious past of our ancestors and their conquests, and then are now presented again as evidence of this crime that they committed a long time ago, and all the while nothing changed, So that is something that I still have to
Sorry,
work
it's not
out.
that nothing changed. I just mentioned the Ecuador statistic, so that everyone is aware that things are getting worse. With mining, things are getting worse. Really, like there was foreign, like I said, 70% of foreign investment in Ecuador is for mining in the last 15 years. So things are getting worse. So meanwhile, we discuss our morals, our superiority, do we give back or not? Companies are getting the mountain, the ownership of the mountain. That's what is happening. And actually, I was very shocked to realize that European countries are changing their mining law so that foreign investors cannot have the resources in Europe. So meanwhile, we are protecting our mountains, we are getting theirs, and then we say intellectually, do we give it back or not, the artifact?
Or does something change? Yes or no? Yeah.
No, things are getting worse in terms of the ownership of the mountain, of course, not the artifact. So don't say things stay the same, things are getting worse. I'm sorry to be so negative, to give the bad news.
Mariana brings up a very interesting point at one section. I don't know, in one sentence you say museum preservation and also talking about indigenous self-preservation and how those two things are not the same. Even though they have the same word in them, they're very, very radically different things. And I see that also in contemporary art museums where friends don't want to be preserved. They want to hold their self-preservation because they don't want a voice to be kind of encapsulated by the museum. But it's just something that I feel like we are very, like you're saying, very conscious of articulating our morals, but our realities are the first preservation that we had. Not to be too negative, but I agree with what you're saying, that we talk about morals, but
Yes, I'm just a little bit brain testing idea. I don't have it very clear, but in a way, if we practice the ideal museum, things can change as well.
Mm-hmm.
So this is maybe what is the connection, let's say, between the relationship between the reality and what can happen, and the discussion of morals and what can happen inside the museum. These two actually practice is the way we will ideally would like to see it happen. And this is the amazing practice that is happening right now in Rio de Janeiro, no? That is that people are practicing this ideal museum. And through this, they are making such an institution that even if the politics change, they cannot change it anymore because it's already there. So it's like this kind of reciprocal loop. I think it's really something to take into account. Right? Without being naive with the reality that yes, it's really terrible what is happening in Ecuador at the moment, but the fact that this is
it's within that, because all these people, I mean, we talk about the museum, but the museum is made by people who we know, who studied with us, so it's not that far away of a place, I like to think, some of them. But within that reality also, precisely because curators, museum staff, communities, indigenous peoples, the public know that things are getting worse, and they feel in their lives that things are getting worse, the Museum of the Future becomes a place, becomes a platform to do something about that. And in many cases, it is simply about saying we exist and we have the right to exist as we are. So it is absolutely also in Brazil, despite everything, it's getting worse. But it's part of that movement, and I suppose it's the counter movement, and it's a small step, but it's there. We're talking about it. We're being live streamed. Who knows who's watching this?
Yeah, I was thinking also in relation to between your work and the States, that the place of things, no? Where do things become meaningful? And since you are in a contemporary art space, I wonder why is this not in an art contemporary art space? Why didn't you think about a contemporary art space? And then when you started speaking about your work and how you were actually asked about why didn't you have you put a bookshop, open a bookshop in Rotterdam, is the fact that you as an author made this, as an artist made this, and then in a way in the States, what we lack is the author, because you as a journalist, you cannot enter somehow as an author. But, I mean, it will be maybe possible, because there a lot of things are possible in the art space, but how do you actually,
I don't know, I was especially struck, because I spoke with a lot of Warani during these weeks there, but I was especially struck with the meeting I had with this great Saint and especially because he told me when he went to school in history, he was taught by Atahualpa, which was the last Inca emperor that fought against the Spaniards.
Yeah, it's like a lot of stories like this. It's so
there's a lot. What's it called, sorry?
Stuff the British stole, and it's from an Australian journalist. And he made a whole series around bringing objects.
Mostly about these objects. They're so
yeah, so many stories. And it's such it's a very nice. You can listen to it, and it goes quite deep. A lot of research. So it's,
it's a nice one.
Sure. Yeah, I have a comment or a question, but I'm just thinking in contemporary art and museums, and thinking about friends who the museum wants to acquire their image or their representation, but don't want to acquire their work for the collections. And with a group of friends, we call this foyer art. You're invited to do a performance in the foyer, but you would never be acquired in the collection, and so they consume a representation or an image of who you are in order to then be able to make the museum seem less stuffy. But when you go into the collection, it's the same stuffiness. And I just also want to mention this about how you're thinking about self-preservation, how your image is also acquired, and in particular how your image is acquired through the key performance indicators or policy that a museum needs, and just also the danger in that kind of acquisition of, I don't know, it's just something about this self-preservation which is starting to click. So many friends to these performances in foyers, but they should have their work collected, you know, or not.
How do they feel about it?
I think friends feel used, don't they? Yeah. Or their work feels used, or they're what we would call bodies of work. A friend uses this term. We say bodies of work in terms of the work we make, but for them it's actual bodies of work, bodies of labor in that sense.
But why would certain museums choose not to buy, not to acquire, not to assess, not to have the works of these colleagues in Europe, but just to show it? Do they what's the agenda there?
I think it's a lot around
certain picture that the museum wants to.
Yeah, because of performance, I think. So it's the literal body.
But I mean, it's a good point, but it's a double-edged sword because the art world or the artists are implied in this as well. You know, they maybe too readily went into that direction. You know, and especially. Well, I'm not a young artist anymore, but I have been for a very, very, very long time. And then when I speak to young artists now, I often see that there is a misunderstanding about what a museum is and what a relationship you should have with a museum. And especially, maybe more so in the Netherlands than in other countries, in which there's a stronger awareness of the practice that relates to galleries and collectors and private people buying your work. We have a lot of very young artists that feel that the museum is not just the end point, it's the first point where your work should go. And there's something, there's a big misunderstanding of how a museum operates beyond also all the archaeological discussions about its genealogies, but a museum collects what represents also a people. So if you skip that step in a way and you go directly to the museum, you've already alienated yourself from this process and you created something quite artificial, and so that's.
But again, I would suggest we think more flexibly about museums, because a museum, there are museums and museums. The Rijkssystem, if I go to the Rijks and I want to do something with them, it's a certain reception. If I go to Tropen Museum, if I call my colleagues in Brazil, so the museum and what it is, I think, especially now the last 10 years, I don't know, for the kind of museum that I work with, maybe in art and contemporary art is totally different, but it's so much in beweging, it's so much, there's so much moving, there's so much changing, I think a lot of times they also don't know what to do, and I think we completely miss the internal conflicts and internal politics that are going on, because there are power relations there inside, and then they change the director, and then there's another director, and then then there's a certain policy, and then there's a city situation. I think of the Wereld Museum here, when the then director wanted to sell everything that was not quote unquote Asian, and the city intervened. So there are so many. So actually, I'm answering to you and looking at him, but I really don't know. I think it's so flexible. It's so changing.
In movement.
Right. In this idea that the museum collects what a community or a nation or what culture is, I think even that is sort of.
Well, maybe rather than just we could say complex, it's another one of those euphemisms.
No, but complex doesn't give the dynamic.
Well, but I wanted to add to the perspective, this kind of abyss that you look into when something just opens up and makes it even more complicated. I think back of the museum in Denekamp, which is, you know, when we talk about the museum now, we're talking about it as an abstract thing, but we all have an image of it as this established, canonical institution. But the truth of it is that we also have museums like in Denekamp, where as an artist or as a cultural worker or as a journalist, you might be interested in working it because it's such a quaint place full of serendipitous surprises, but you wouldn't be caught dead inside it. You know, you wouldn't want to work there anymore or be represented by it because it's a remnant of something from 2 generations ago. It's dying out, it's a dinosaur. And that's also part of this discussion.
But is that also the case for the natural sciences and biology?
Well,
Because I suppose.
it's called Natura Docet, so let nature teach. And it's more than 100 years old. But now they tend to focus more on the regional nature of, they call it heemraadschap, I think. They want to be more like a regional museum, and the whole ethnographic collection is now in the basement. But those were things being brought back to Denekamp during the 21st century by people from Twente that were either in Indonesia or, like in this case, Ecuador.
Interesting, because then that brings me back to our discussion with Jason about erfgoed, and heritage. That's another discussion because we should soon wrap up, But I think it's very interesting that actually those ethnic objects, or the objects that built the ethnographic collection, is now, let's say, maybe under the current political wind that is not from today or tomorrow, it's already going on for a longer time, and that actually the ethnic collection is not considered to be of us or the specific place, so we need to sort of get rid of that literally, while actually it is very much so, but in a very contested or maybe awkward or complex way, So in that sense, to bring, let's say, the focus of a museum back to its immediate surroundings, while excluding the stories that are also embedded in these immediate surroundings, but by other walks of history somehow, or twists of history, is really interesting, And I think like, oh wow, that's also a way how you can exclude information from the history books by just, let's say,
especially because this museum was established by donations of rich people in Twente, a lot of cotton trade.
There you go.
Exactly.
But also missionaries, evangelicals.
That whole region has a lot of ethnographic, a number of ethnographic collections from missionaries. Also from the Brazilian Amazon, and it's.
So, I mean, this is also the reason that the museum has been surviving for more than 100 years. The money that was put in there, now they're really financial distress. So I don't know if they're going to survive.
But if they re-regionalize themselves, and if unfortunately the discussions in The Hague go the way they seem to be going, it might just be the recipe, become very powerful.
But isn't it true that with these kind of museums, especially the small ones, you sometimes get the situation when they're in financial distress that at the same time as they're desperately trying to redefine themselves, they cling on to these old artifacts in the cellar, because when a local politician says we should shut down this museum, they say, you can't shut us down because we have all this stuff. What do you want, just to throw it on the street? That's impossible. Look, there's this journalist from the NSA who came and wrote an article about these worthless spheres.
Well, they were not complaining about, for example, money going too much to the metropolitan area of the Randstad, but everything goes to Zwolle. They don't have a national vote. They focus on Overijssel. Well, I don't know. I thought that the new cultural policy will only get into or kickstart in 2029. So I mean, I don't think they will make 2029. So
maybe we should wrap it up.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.